The phone buzzed on the conference table. 30 pairs of eyes fixed on Ethan, but he didn't reach for it. Not this time. The presentation on the screen flashed quarterly numbers in alarming red. Richard Hartman offered a thin smile from across the table. "Mr. Marshall, I think this might be important," the assistant said. Ethan read the message. His expression shifted. "Excuse me," he said, standing. "My son needs me." He walked out, leaving stunned faces and Richard's disbelieving laugh behind. 6 months earlier, Ethan Marshall had been a man who measured success in hours, overtime, meetings, decisions per minute. He constantly checked the golden designer watch on his wrist, a gift from the board for exceeding last quarter's targets, not out of interest in the time, but out of fear of wasting it. Every morning, he'd open his desk drawer and take out a single blue Lego piece. He'd examine it, turn it between his fingers, then put it back, a ritual whose meaning he barely remembered. After his divorce 3 years ago, he had been granted custody of his 12-year-old son, Luke, a decision influenced more by his top-tier legal team than his devotion as a father. In truth, they existed side by side, 2 satellites in separate orbits that rarely intersected. "Time is money, and I'm investing it for our future," he'd often say, carrying Luke's school schedule in his wallet as proof of paternal responsibility. The fact that he never actually attended events was a detail he concealed from himself. The family photo on his desk was constantly buried under business papers, a metaphor for his life. Every morning, they sat at the same kitchen table, Ethan with the Wall Street Journal, Luke with a box of Kellogg's cereal. They shared a space, but not words. The silence was an invisible wall between them. "Any new projects today?" Ethan would ask without looking up. "Not really," Luke usually replied, even when he had a presentation or a sports game that day. Their morning routine followed a scripted pattern. Ethan, the busy but caring father. Luke, the son who expected nothing. In the cafeteria at work, Ethan often saw Dave Miller, a colleague who had declined a promotion 2 years ago to spend more time with his kids. "A walking career grave," Ethan once said loudly enough for Dave to hear. "It takes sacrifice to prioritize. He'll never get that." Each evening, Ethan checked his emails 3 times before going to bed, an almost religious ritual giving him the illusion of control. During calls, he muted family notifications and immediately answered unimportant business calls. His smartphone was never off. It was his lifeline to the company, more vital than any heartbeat. On his morning run to the office, he passed the same bench in the park, always at a sprint, never stopping. The idea of spending even 5 minutes doing nothing seemed absurd. Something was cracking under Ethan's flawless exterior. The antacid tablets he discreetly swallowed during meetings. The untouched meals going cold as he answered emails. The panic episodes in the office bathroom when the stress overwhelmed him. The constant nervous fidgeting with his tie. The compulsive tapping on his phone. Tiny fractures in his facade that nobody noticed, except Richard Hartman. Richard, the deputy head of the development department, ambitious and sharp. Where others admired Ethan's drive, Richard sensed weakness. In meetings, he dropped quiet remarks that undermined Ethan's authority. Sideways glances, muffled laughter. Little pricks that stung over time. Ethan noticed the slight tear in Richard's expensive designer jacket and the coffee stain on his otherwise immaculate shirt. Something was off. Richard was never careless about his appearance. "Maybe we should get someone tougher?" Richard had suggested in a team meeting when Ethan stumbled over a slide. The jab struck hard. It hit Ethan's deepest fear, not being good enough. Utterly irresponsible. Ethan once overheard Richard muttering around the corner. If the board knew what really. The door closed before the rest came out. Within Ethan's own team, he'd taken a young, ambitious analyst under his wing, Jason Morgan, who reminded him of himself 15 years ago. Hungry, brilliant, relentlessly driven. The key to success is absolute devotion, Ethan told him at a mentoring lunch. Family comes second. Sounds harsh, but that's the price of real success. At home, he noticed that Luke never fully unpacked his suitcase, a silent reminder of his readiness to leave at any moment. The evasive looks when Ethan asked about school. The quick dash upstairs whenever Ethan got home. The locked bedroom door. Signals Ethan ignored because he didn't know how to respond. Once, he caught Luke scribbling hurriedly in a notebook, snapping it shut when Ethan entered the room. "Homework," Luke mumbled, hiding it under his math book. Ethan nodded and forgot about it. When Luke asked him to participate in the school project, "What does your parent do for work?" Ethan only saw a scheduling conflict with an important board meeting. "I can't, Luke. The Simpson acquisition is on the line," he explained, typing an email. "But I'll send Jason. He knows all the numbers and can do the presentation better than I can." Luke nodded, face expressionless. He hadn't expected anything else. What Ethan didn't know was that Luke had already started researching schools near his mother's place. Under his bed sat a hidden stack of brochures. His mother had submitted paperwork for a transfer. The clock was ticking. Ethan had only 3 weeks to convince his son to stay. Time he didn't think he had. Luke stood alone before his class that day. No PowerPoint, no big corporate success story. Instead, a homemade video played. A silent montage of missed moments, empty seats at school events, a waiting soccer team after a game, a half-built Lego spaceship with a post-it reading, "Maybe next weekend." The spaceship, the Millennium Falcon model, they had started on Luke's 10th birthday. During one rare afternoon, Ethan had genuinely been there. "We'll build it together, man to man," Ethan had said, a real father-son project. They stopped after 2 afternoons, like so many broken promises before it. The teacher ended the video with teary eyes. The kids clapped, not out of politeness, but collective understanding children often show better than adults. "My dad isn't here," Luke said at the end, "because he's busy creating a better future for other people." Ethan only found out the next day when another father stopped him after a board meeting. "Marshall, your boy. He was impressive yesterday," the man said. Ethan didn't even know his name. "Excuse me?" "Your son's presentation. Not what you'd expect, but damn powerful. Your kid's got more emotional intelligence than most adults I know." Ethan smiled and nodded as though he understood. He didn't. A text lit up Luke's phone. "Did you talk to him?" Luke deleted it without answering as Ethan walked into the room. Later that night, Ethan found the tablet on Luke's desk while his son was at basketball practice, a game Ethan had missed. The video wasn't hard to find. It was titled, innocuously, "Dad's Office." In the first seconds, it showed an empty chair, Ethan's spot at last year's Christmas concert, then a slow pan of the audience, where every chair was full. The camera zoomed to a small sign, "Reserved for Mr. Marshall." Beside it, Ethan's assistant Jason sat, clearly uncomfortable. Ethan's hands started to tremble as more scenes passed. Luke's 7th birthday, when Ethan arrived late and the candles were already blown out. A school hallway with Luke standing alone as other kids' parents picked them up. The half-finished Lego spaceship on Luke's desk, a perpetual reminder of their incomplete project. Ethan gasped when he spotted a box in Luke's closet filled with carefully saved tickets and programs. souvenirs from all the events Ethan had missed. Each one a missed opportunity. His breath caught. He tried to stand, but his legs failed him. A wave of dizziness crashed over him, and for a moment, he thought his heart would stop. Tears came without warning, streaming freely, his first real cry in decades. A deep, guttural sound escaped his throat as the final clip appeared. Luke, sitting alone at a big dinner table, staring at Ethan's empty chair. He fainted, overwhelmed. When he came to, he was on the floor of Luke's room, the tablet beside him, screen dark. His phone was buzzing nonstop. 7 missed calls from Richard Hartman. The text was brief. Board meeting tomorrow at 9. Your quarterly will be presented. If you're interested. It was a perfect moment for Richard to step into Ethan's role. A moment of weakness he could exploit. That night, Ethan spent alone in Luke's dark room, staring at the half-packed suitcases in the corner, seriously considering that maybe it would be better if Luke went to live with his mother. Maybe I'm just not cut out to be a dad, he whispered into the darkness. The next morning, Ethan found Luke in the backyard, listlessly throwing a basketball against the wall. I saw your video, Ethan said after a long pause. Luke caught the ball and turned away, his hands deep in his pockets, body rigid with defense. And? It was honest. You shouldn't be in my room snooping, Luke said. Ethan sat on the garden bench. The distance between them felt like an ocean. You're right. I'm never there. You say everything you do is for me, but I'm not part of it. Luke's voice sounded older than 12. Maybe I'm better off with Mom. At least she's there. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to defend, to explain. But what explanation could fill the void in all those empty seats, in all those moments? Later, in his office, Ethan found an old photo in a drawer. His father, absent from Ethan's own graduation ceremony. A mirror he'd long avoided. The scent of expensive aftershave triggered the memory. An empty chair, a missed game, the same words. Next time, son, I promise. In the bathroom, he stared at himself in the mirror and barely recognized himself. Gray hair he'd never noticed, sunken cheeks, hunted eyes. It was a generational wound he'd unconsciously inherited and passed on. Ethan stared at his father's photo for hours, looking for answers, similarities, warnings. I'm not like my father, he later insisted in a meeting. Unaware, he mimicked his father's hated gesture, nervously tapping his fingers on the table. Over the next few days, Ethan oscillated between resolve and doubt. He began drafting an email requesting a sabbatical. His fingers shook. Maybe just 1 year? He wondered. Until Luke's with his mom and I can get back in. He deleted the draft and started over. At home, he saw Luke examining a sealed envelope, quickly hiding it when Ethan entered the room. It turned out to be the official school transfer approval. Luke couldn't send it yet. Not yet. After a promising dinner where he actually arrived on time, came a relapse. Richard offered him a deal to save his career, a strategic partnership that would prove his value. It would only cost him 1 weekend, Luke's first basketball final of the season. Ethan wavered, agreed, and missed the game. He remembered the expression on Luke's face when he returned home empty-handed, clutching the trophy, a silent indictment louder than any words. I'm sorry, Save it, Luke interrupted flatly. I didn't expect anything. That moment, this defeat, became the turning point. The realization that no business deal could ever outweigh broken trust hit Ethan full force. The next morning, stuck in traffic, his car between 2 exits, left to work, right to Luke's school, where his son had a classroom presentation in 20 minutes. Ethan gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. 20 seconds to decide. Then the phone rang. Richard Hartman. "Marshall, where are you? The CEO wants to speak before the meeting. It's about your future at the company." A moment of decision. A crystal clear instant. Ethan hung up without responding and took the right exit. In the intense conversation with his boss, Ethan visibly struggled. But then he stood firm and declined the offered promotion. Instead, he requested a 6-month sabbatical to handle family matters. As Ethan signed the form, he wondered what his office would look like in 6 months, and whether he'd have one at all. "You're throwing your career away, Marshall," his boss shook his head. "For what? A few soccer games?" "No, sir. For my son?" What followed was rougher than Ethan expected. Richard used his absence to systematically undermine him. In a key meeting, he embarrassed Ethan. If Ethan is even still interested in his career. A subtle innuendo that planted seeds of doubt. With investors, Richard spread rumors about Ethan's alleged emotional instability. "Funny you missed your son's basketball game," Richard casually remarked. Apparently, it was important. A sly implication. How did Richard know? Former colleagues began to change toward him. One ignored him in the hallway, his name removed from a project schedule, a meeting room suddenly unavailable when he tried to book it. In the few meetings Ethan still attended, his insecurity was visible. Jerky gestures, eyes drifting to empty chairs, faltering speech, nervous fiddling with a worn-off shirt button that once had been immaculate. When he ran into former colleagues, he nervously straightened his jacket before relaxing. In the parking lot, he bumped into his former mentee, Jason. The young man's face looked drained, dark circles under his eyes. "I have your old office now," Jason said proudly. "Richard's giving me all the big projects. I sometimes even sleep there." Ethan looked at him with a mix of recognition and horror. A mirror of himself. One evening at home, Ethan faced financial panic. Bills piled up, an Excel spreadsheet open. How would he afford Luke's school costs now? The sabbatical meant a significant pay cut, and his savings were dwindling faster than expected. "Is this organic granola really twice the price?" he asked at the grocery store, comparing labels. Luke watched him curiously as he reached for the cheaper option. It was almost the old life, almost, but something important was missing. The real turning point came during an investor presentation when Ethan made a last-ditch effort to save his project. In the middle of his presentation, the door opened. Luke stood there, pale, with a look Ethan had never seen. "Dad," he said, a single word heavy with urgency. Without hesitation, without finishing his talk, Ethan walked out. It turned out Luke was having a serious allergic reaction and needed to go to the ER. A week later, just as Richard planned to take over in the Simpson deal, Ethan disrupted the meeting. "I have to leave at 6, Luke's game." The CEO raised an eyebrow. "We'll hardly finish by then." "Can't do 6 p.m., I have a game to catch," Ethan said without apology. His phone rang. A major client. He looked at the name, then at Luke doing homework. He hit decline, distinct contrast to how he'd once acted. Stepping out, he turned his phone off deliberately, a gesture more telling than any words. His nightly email ritual replaced by something new, intentionally leaving the phone in another room and sitting with Luke to help with homework. His designer watch stayed more and more in his drawer. Time ceased to be measured in meetings and deals, and was now counted in moments shared. "Time is the only thing you can't buy back," his old mentor once said offhandedly. Ethan finally understood the truth of that. He sold his expensive car in a quiet act of renunciation, ran his hand over the hood one last time before handing over the keys. Later, they moved into a smaller apartment closer to Luke's school. A tangible consequence of his financial loss, but also a fresh start. His old business card remained in his wallet. He touched it briefly and dropped it. On his last day in the large corner office, he packed his personal items into a box while a janitor removed his nameplate. The new, smaller office had no window view, just a courtyard. A former colleague later sent him a screenshot. "Your spot's already taken. You did the right thing?" The first attempts to rebuild a real relationship with Luke were spectacular failures. A chaotic weekend camping trip filled with misunderstandings and awkward silence. Ethan burned dinner, didn't get Luke's video games, misread his friend's remarks. Ethan's forced smile betrayed his insecurity, while Luke hardly spoke. "Dad, level 20 is the boss level," Luke explained patiently after Ethan failed the same challenge 3 times. A tiny step forward. Luke called him Dad, offered tips, despite Ethan's awkwardness in his world. They talked about the camping trip and laughed. Then Ethan realized Luke had gone quiet. What was he really thinking? "Want to drive this time?" Ethan asked on another outing, holding his breath until Luke answered. "I'm only 12, Luke answered, but a small smile touched his lips. In a new setback, Ethan missed a school event and was caught by Luke, another sign of how deeply the old patterns persisted. Without thinking, he checked his phone under the table. For just a second. Luke noticed, but said nothing. Ethan mentally berated himself harder than any of Luke's reactions. He'd sworn he'd do better, but doubt still nagged deep inside. When Luke casually mentioned a new afternoon commitment, Ethan froze. He'd looked in his calendar 3 times and seen nothing. Slowly, he pulled out his notebook and carefully marked 3 dates, one circled multiple times. "Band rehearsal today," he read. "Right?" "Not a big deal," said Luke, though his disappointed look said otherwise. "I'll be ready in 20 minutes, Ethan promised. "We've got this." In an unexpected move, Ethan approached Dave Miller, the colleague he had once mocked for his family-first choices. "How do you do it?" he asked bluntly. "How do you balance it all?" Dave stared at him, weighing whether the question was real. "You lose some things," he said finally, "but you gain so much more." With endless patience, they began rebuilding the old Lego spaceship, first with arguments, then with small mistakes. Luke corrected Ethan. They reached for the same piece at once, and then they both laughed over a construction error that made the ship look like a crooked bird. "What does the spaceship symbolize?" Ethan asked one evening as they continued working. Luke hesitated. "It's like us," he finally said. "Broken, but repairable. Maybe." Professionally, Ethan shifted. He accepted a part-time consulting role that gave him more flexibility. In meetings, he no longer sat at the head of the table, delegating tasks he once insisted on handling personally. The loss of control that once terrified him now felt freeing. One email remained unread. For one last time, he glanced at the subject line. "Leadership position, confidential offer." The temptation to jump back in surged momentarily. What if, he thought, but then he deleted it. Luke's bedroom door, sealed like a fortress for months, opened slowly, first a crack, then fully. At first, Luke still called him Mr. Marshall instead of Dad, a small but painful distance. He kept physically distant too, walking a step ahead or behind on their walks, never beside him. Then signs of a thaw appeared. Luke began unpacking his things instead of living out of a suitcase. When it rained, he hesitantly buttoned Ethan's coat. Fleeting but meaningful. At breakfast, he wordlessly handed him a second mug of hot chocolate. One day, Ethan passed Luke's open door and noticed the room had been tidied, for the first time in months. He paused in the doorway, unsure what this sudden change meant. He noticed an edge of colored paper under the bed, but didn't look closer. Their morning ritual shifted subtly, the newspaper narrower, the cereal box lower. The invisible wall between them acquired cracks. On an unremarkable Tuesday, something unexpected happened. Luke casually asked for advice on choosing an elective, a passing comment that almost escaped Ethan's notice. It was the first time in years Luke had asked for his opinion where it mattered. "Dad, I've got something to tell you. Luke's words were cut off by the phone ringing. When it went silent, he changed his mind. Never mind. Whatever he meant to say remained a mystery. Even more surprisingly, Luke began unconsciously doing one of Ethan's typical gestures. A brief touch of his left eyebrow when deep in thought. A small, unintentional mimicry that said more about connection than any words. One spring weekend, something happened that brought tears to Ethan's eyes. Luke called him Dad. Not Mr. Marshall, not you, but Dad. It happened while they were in the grocery store. "Dad, can we get the cornflakes?" Ethan had to turn his head to hide his emotion. 6 months later, they sat together on a park bench. Ethan with a book in hand, Luke by his side. A moment of peace and presence, without rush, without feeling like time was lost. When they finally placed the completed Lego spaceship on Luke's shelf, Ethan couldn't ignore the symbolism. It stood for their repaired relationship, not perfect, skewed in places, but whole and rebuilt together. "Dad?" Luke asked one evening as they planned their summer trip. "Yes?" "Are you coming to tomorrow's parent meeting? Mr. Peterson wants to talk about the science project." Ethan set down his calendar, now a simple notebook instead of a Rolex. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Luke's smile said it all. A fresh calendar hung in the kitchen, filled with dates, Luke's games, school events, planned outings. No maybe, no question marks, no empty promises. Beside it, a photo of the two of them at the camping trip. Luke with a marshmallow-smeared face, Ethan with a laugh that reached his eyes. On Ethan's wrist was a plain watch. Time was now shared moments, not rushed efficiency. The best part? Luke no longer tensed when Ethan came home, expecting his father would leave again. He had stopped doubting every promise. Trust had returned, slowly, steadily. Luke leaned his head on Ethan's shoulder, a gesture of trust worth more than any promotion. The once half-packed suitcases were finally shoved in the basement. Instead, a vacation catalog lay open on Luke's desk with marked pages, plans for their future, their shared future. Ethan still didn't have all the answers, but now he knew what truly mattered when he sat beside his son at the kitchen table, both silent, both finally home.